Happy New Year. That is the message right now for the West Virginia Mountaineers. I'm sure that is the message that Neal Brown is telling his team as they get to celebrate the ringing in of a new year with a bowl victory, as the West Virginia Mountaineers are the 2020 Liberty Bowl champions as they get a New Year's Eve bowl victory. West Virginia with a 24-21 comeback victory over the Army Black Knights, who finish out their year one shy of that elusive 10th victory. Rare occasion for that program, certainly in the last half century. Nonetheless, they finish at 9-3. West Virginia finishes at 6-4. I'm your host here on this edition of West Virginia's postgame show here, brought to you by WVSportsNow and, of course, on Pittsburgh Sports Live. This is the Liberty Bowl postgame show here for PSL. And as I said, the Mountaineers get a bowl victory. It is Neal Brown's first bowl win as Mountaineers head coach in his first bowl appearance. So he goes 1-0 after missing last year, obviously, with the whole rebuilding and the climb. West Virginia takes one rung up the ladder in their climb with that bowl victory. Army, good team. They certainly gave him maybe more of a fight than some would have thought. However, Army ends up with the loss, but a lot to unpack in this game because not only the Mountaineers getting a victory and that being a story for the program, a lot also goes on that may lead even to a quarterback controversy now going into the offseason and that new year. Again, I'm Mike Asti, and I'm going to be joined by both of WVSportsNow's head honchos, Tom Bragg and Cody Nespor. Cody currently still doing the Zooms, the post-game Zooms for us. So he will join us in a little bit. But Tom and I will get things started. And Tom, number one, we talked about this throughout tons of post-game shows throughout the year on, obviously, this is not the best of years for the program. Obviously, this is a year that's clearly better than last year, but there certainly has been some disappointments in this year. It's been a roller coaster ride, not a conference title. They're certainly not at that point yet in the program, but nonetheless, it is a rung up the ladder. It is a bowl victory. And we talked about what that could mean and how important that was. Seemed like you kind of lean more towards, you just wanted them to play well towards the end of the year. And they kind of did. They got away from the Oklahoma game. They played poorly prior to that. Didn't have to play Oklahoma in what probably would have been a major loss. They get this win, even though they don't play great. Before we get into the quarterback carousel, what do you make of the bowl victory? What does this mean for you, for the program, for Neal Brown, that they do finish it above 500? They do get the sixth win, which would have made them bowl eligible in a normal year. And they are a bowl champion at the end of the day of 2020.
Yeah, it's warm, fuzzy feelings going into the offseason. You get to celebrate on TV. You get to take a big trophy home. Everybody's happy at the end. You know, it's the best case scenario when you're in a bowl game. It's obviously a different scenario than usual because usually you get 3 or 4 weeks and you get all of that extra practice, and then you get the potential to have this warm, fuzzy moment to send you off. Didn't quite have all of that extra practice as teams are kind of accustomed to, but you get that moment, you get that win. It's another trophy in the trophy case. It's another line on your recruiting resume when you're going into prospects' homes saying, hey, look, we just won the Liberty Bowl. Everything's trending up. We had one of the best defenses in the country this year. We were playing with the walking wounded on defense there at the end, and we were still able to corral one of the most unique offenses in the country. I think it's obviously there are some issues and things you can nitpick and get into that we certainly will when the offseason is fully in bloom. But the offseason is about an hour and 10 minutes old right now. And if you're a West Virginia fan or Neal Brown and that staff, you're feeling good about where you're at right now going into this offseason.
Yeah, winning a bowl game is better than not winning a bowl game. I mean, that's just the fact. And the Mountaineers decided they wanted to play in a bowl game, which I'm sure a lot of that was about practice. A lot of that was about sending off the seniors the right way. A lot of that was also about still finding out the future of this team, still potentially needing to find out the quarterback situation, and still having a lot of young players here. Letty Brown wanting to get over 1,000 yards. They did some things. It was a positive to be in this bowl game. They actually publicly said they wanted Army to be that team after Tennessee had to drop out because of COVID. Army was a better team during the regular season, where Tennessee has kind of puttered into the bowl eligibility.
Army was a way better team than Tennessee this year.
Right. Army was a 9-win team. You can say what you want about the schedule, which we did talk about on the preview show. Their best game of the year was a loss to Cincinnati. Granted, they did play them well, They didn't really have a big win, but it was a challenging situation for an independent service academy team to even build a schedule and get through that many games. And then they won. So Army absolutely had a quality year, is for sure. Again, we can get into.
They've been really good for the last 10 years or so. I think 7 years under Jeff Monken, their coach that was at App State,
and that was even
has all that, the Georgia Tech offensive experience. So they've been really good under Monken. I think they kind of fly under the radar because some of the other service academies will pop up and have really, really good years and end up beating Army for those Commander-in-Chief trophy games. But that's not to take away from Army, though.
And he won 3 of them.
Quietly, a very strong program for about a decade now.
Yeah, he's won 3 of those. A lot of those recently. He's built up Army to certainly be the best of the service academies. They certainly prove that this year. Currently, that's the case right now. And certainly can maybe earn him a look by a Power 5 program or a non-service academy program for sure. That was brought up on the broadcast that it's almost shocking that he has not got interviews and got more of a look, at least what we're aware of publicly. Maybe he has, but this certainly could lead that in direction. He's had to deal with tons of challenges, and to get 9 wins, kudos to him. So West Virginia gets a bowl win in a decent bowl game with some history against a quality opponent. All good. I agree. However, Tom Bragg again, Mike Asti might be joined by Cody Nespor here in a moment here on the West Virginia Liberty Bowl post-game show here. WVU's victory in the Liberty Bowl here on WV Sports Now and Pittsburgh Sports Live. The Mountaineers won this game in odd fashion, because even though we agree Army certainly had a quality season because of their schedule, West Virginia certainly was a favorite for many in this game. It would have been an upset victory if Army would have won. Certainly the way they were winning for a while, it looked like Army was on a path to maybe get a pretty convincing blowout win where the Mountaineers offense was puttering and their defense was playing so well. Number one, what did Army do early to have such a lead against West Virginia and make it look like Army was full steam ahead to a big upset bowl victory and that elusive 10th win? And then how did the Mountaineers turn things around? And that could certainly involve the quarterback change, which we'll get to more in depth here in a moment. But this game almost got away from the Mountaineers. It was kind of shocking to me they changed things at quarterback, but it certainly jump-started the team. But WVU defense played well for a while, but Army with a clear run first, run second, run third, run fourth offense. They usually don't pass more than 2 or 3 times an entire game, and were able to do that in a half here today. What did Army do so well, and what did the Mountaineers not play well enough in the first half, or was it just Army maybe better than even people think because that schedule kind of masked how good maybe they are?
Man, I don't know if we watched the same game. I thought that West Virginia played extremely well in the first half, but was unfortunate at some turnovers and some quite frankly, just some bad quarterback play from Jarret Doege.
Well, that led to Jarret Doege.
He had been so good for so long at not making those mistakes that have killed you. I believe we talked about this before. He wasn't going to go out and be like the superstar MVP All-American quarterback, but he also wasn't going to go out and do things that torpedoed your chances at winning. And that's what happened today. He had just a terrible throw on an interception, and the fumble. Oh man, that's one of the worst plays by a quarterback I've ever seen. And if you watched what Army was doing, they were really selling out to try to run up the middle, and it just wasn't working, but they were starting to wear on that West Virginia defense. And then they started pitching it outside. They started finding some room to run. And that combined with the mistakes that West Virginia had made, you end up with Army having a lead in a game that realistically West Virginia could have been winning by 2 or 3 touchdowns. You had drives stall out for field goals that were missed. You had dropped touchdowns in the end zone that turn into just a field goal rather than a touchdown. So really, I thought West Virginia played well, but there was just maybe a handful of plays, maybe 5 plays in the first half that really went against them in a bad way. And in the second half, Kendall comes in and it kind of, you saw the spark kind of go off. Guys weren't dropping the ball 3 out of 4 passes. They were only dropping maybe 1 out of 4 at that point. But and Kendall was giving West Virginia something that Doege wasn't. It was a threat to take off with his feet. Now, he wasn't going to go run 60 yards through tackles or anything like that, but the threat was there for him to take off, and Army had to respect that. And once they had to respect that, it really opened things up for that passing game, because Letty Brown, they keyed on Letty Brown. They were not going to let him beat them today. And kudos to West Virginia. This offensive coaching staff had to make some changes and adjustments during the game. They had to go away from their bread and butter with Letty Brown, who'd been so successful for them. And they went in and they beat a very good team, basically with their backup quarterback in the second half. So I talked about those warm, fuzzy feelings for this team in general. You look at what they were able to accomplish when they were absolutely not at their best today. And I think you say, okay, well, we can do that when we kind of stunk at times, then imagine what we can do when it's all clicking for us. We just got to figure out a way to be more consistent and make that happen, which is, I guess, really the goal of coaching for every coach. You want to be as consistently good as you can on every single play. But West Virginia showed some strides in that direction, I thought today, and maybe even more importantly, that the ability to be able to adjust in a game when what your script called for or what your game plan called for isn't necessarily working. You're able to make those calls on the fly and find something that does work against a team that I said was very, very good and maybe a bit under the radar and underappreciated.
I definitely think, obviously it's great for the program to get a bowl victory, especially after this challenging year, but the perception going into the offseason really increased for Neal Brown after this game. He had a great coaching day for sure. And that includes the halftime adjustments. That includes being able to kind of be humble. That includes changing quarterbacks midway through, which changes the game plan a little bit. Neal Brown definitely had a nice strategic day. The luck was not there for West Virginia, but the luck had not been there in some points earlier in the year, which ended up being those losses, those 4 losses for this team throughout the season. And we did talk about this, that I feel, and I still do, despite him getting pulled in a bowl victory, that Jarret Doege sometimes takes it on the chin a little bit too much from some Mountaineer fans, where he was never going to be Will Grier, Geno Smith, etc. Mountaineer fans maybe get spoiled by having so many great
even those guys in the moment had their feet to the fire from Mountaineer fans. If you're the quarterback, that's just kind of part of the territory.
Absolutely, but
it's easy to look back now and say,
yeah,
oh well, Will Grier and Geno didn't have it. Yeah, they did. They absolutely did when that was going on. But I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, well, yeah, I was just saying that I agree, but there's a lower ceiling for
fair.
For Jarret Doege than those guys. I mean, Will Grier was being talked about as an NFL product the second he walked on the campus of West Virginia University. Not the case for Jarret Doege, but Jarret Doege playing well most of the season. When they have lost, though, when he's not had his best days, it's been because of turnovers. It's been because of those mistakes. And we are now going to join Cody Nespor, our other guy here at WV Sports Now. So we are going to bring on Cody. As we bring on Cody, though, Tom, I do want to ask you, we talked about the quarterback change and the differences of Austin Kendall. And I do feel fans have kind of been too hard on Jarret Doege. I know I also talked about that with Cody on past postgame shows, but he didn't have a good day. The fumble doesn't even go into the stat line. An interception as well, 15 for 25, 159, a TD, 1 pick, though. Kendall ended up coming in 8 for 17, 121, 2 touchdowns, and no mistakes. Certainly a better day for him in limited action. Were you surprised by the move? Because Neal Brown had pretty much stuck with Doege the whole year, including that Texas Tech game, which was very similar to this for Jarret Doege. He went out in his post game and said, Jarret Doege is still our guy. But now he does leave a taste for fans that is Jarret Doege the guy for the future because of how things went down in this game. Were you surprised the move was made? And does this lead into the offseason of now a quarterback discussion?
I think as long as there's not an absolute clear-cut number one, Neal Brown has shown there's going to be a quarterback discussion every offseason. At least that's been the case so far in his 2 offseasons.
The offseason
with West Virginia. As far as was I surprised by the move to change quarterbacks? No, I wasn't surprised that he changed quarterbacks. I was surprised he brought Austin Kendall in. I thought it was an opportunity to see what else you have, to see the other guys that are going to be in the competition with Jarret Doege going forward if he's not going to be the guy.
Maybe he really wanted to win the bowl game, though.
There's that too. But it was just in the moment, I was surprised that it wasn't a Garrett Green, quite frankly. But Austin Kendall, hats off to him. You know, that's a guy. You go back to last year when Doege had replaced him as the starter at the end of the year, and they have that comeback win against TCU in the last game of the season, and they didn't go to a bowl game, so obviously that was it. And the whole team celebrating on the field in Fort Worth, and I was down on the field, and you see Austin Kendall, off by himself, just kind of not participating in the celebration, not really interacting with anybody. And you think, oh man, that guy's done. He's done with the team. He's done with this coaching staff. And it could have gone sour for him a bunch of times since then. You know, you're the backup. Anytime Jarret Doege does something good, you say, oh, well, good thing Kendall wasn't in there. And it would have been really easy for him to get down and just kind of say, you know, nuts to this. I don't want to subject myself to it. But he stayed the course. He put the work in practice, obviously. And he came in when West Virginia needed him today and really – I didn't think that he was like a superstar or anything, but he wasn't making those mistakes, and he was a calming presence for that offense when they really needed it. They were able to come back and get the win. So it's a great story for Austin Kendall as far as the quarterback position with WVU going forward, and we'll let Cody hop in on this too.
Sure.
I think the door is wide open for somebody else to come in and take the job from Jarret Doege. I think it's still his to lose to the guys that you have coming back, but the door definitely is open now. Cody, what do you think?
Yeah.
Get you in on this, Cody.
I was a little bit surprised that Kendall came in today. Like, Doege wasn't playing well, but he hasn't played well before this year, and Neal never made the switch.
The turnovers, he hadn't been making the turnovers though. He was actively making mistakes before. Something Mike and I talk about was that he wasn't killing you with mistakes. He wasn't going out and throwing 5 or 6 touchdowns and having these all-star games, but he wasn't killing you either. And I thought the turnovers today really seemed to be the tipping point that got him out of there.
Right. And then for next year, I mean, I would be surprised if it wasn't Doege to open the year. Just because, I mean, at this point, he's going to be, in his 5th year as a starter, or at least partial starter. I would be surprised. And then for Kendall today, I know a lot of, obviously everybody wants the Garrett Green to come in, but I was curious, and we didn't get to ask Neal this, but I was curious Garrett probably didn't take any first or second team reps.
I think that's why. Yeah. I think it would have really hampered you in terms of winning this bowl game. Tom, if they would have made that move, and sometimes this does occur in bowl games, they were down by multiple scores at that point. It's almost like then you're almost in a training camp mode and you're practicing and trying to figure out what you have. But it certainly appeared like Neal Brown wanted to do whatever he had to do to win on this day and worry about tomorrow after this day. I don't think there's any way to win going to Green.
I agree. That's almost 100% the thought process with Neal Brown. But I was just saying that in that moment, I was surprised that was the direction that they went. Right. It makes total sense and it worked out. But in the moment when Doege comes out and Kendall comes in, you go, whoa, Kendall, not Green. That's a little bit surprising there. But like I said, it worked out. It was the right call for sure.
Sure. I think it showed something about Neal that we've kind of been seeing, but there hasn't been like that one moment you can point to, is that he's loyal to his guys, right?
Right.
Like
100%.
He brought Kendall in here last year and let
Kendall
him
earned it to come back.
Yeah. And then like you were saying, like he could have put Green in, and if they lost, nobody really would have questioned it. But he throws Kendall out there and gives him a shot. And I think he's really more of a player's coach than we might give him credit for, because he's not kind of the traditional rah-rah, player's coach, but he is still a young guy, and he seems to really connect with these guys well.
He's definitely a young coach. He clearly seems to love being there, despite all the rumors that we've been dealing with the last few weeks. And the players certainly seem to be taking to him. Fans, media almost immediately felt like he was the right fit, and everyone seems to love Neal Brown. Obviously, at some point, and all three of us have talked about this at different points throughout the year, he needed a big win. He needed something to be a moment for him eventually to be part of his resume. It can't just be everyone loves him so much. And this certainly could be a seminal moment, making that decision, sticking with his guy. That's going to really show the locker room that if you work at it, he will be loyal to you. He will go back to you. I'm sure he said to himself too, not only do I want to win today, and an inexperienced guy wouldn't give me that if it can't be Doege, but Austin Kendall, he earned this spot. I have to give him another go at this, or else how do I look him in the eye if we win or if we lose and I don't go to him and give him an opportunity? So that goes a long way in the locker room for the future. It's still only year 2 and he has a bowl win. All, again, fuzzy feelings, as Tom put it, to open up the show here for the Mountaineers because of the victory. Tom, Bragg, Cody Nespor here, Mike Asti on the WV Sports Now West Virginia Mountaineers Liberty Bowl victory postgame show here on Pittsburgh Sports Live. Cody, I do want to ask you, because Tom brought up Austin Kendall being down and out last year and then staying the course. And obviously anybody who wants can come back because of COVID this year. That does bring up more of the quarterback controversy into the offseason now with the way they won this game. I was actually kind of surprised, like you, the decision was made just because Doege has been able to play out of it at times. He wasn't horrendous. He just was making mistakes. So if he somehow could take care of the football better, it maybe could have turned around with him as well. We've seen that earlier in the year. And I do think he's been better than people think throughout the season. But number one, what does this now do for you in terms of, in terms of the conversation and the mindset of Doege? Because we talked about Austin Kendall being so down last year. I don't know if you're able to speak to Doege at all, if he was made available in terms of his mindset. No. So just in terms of your thoughts then, Dage's future with this team next year, how do you now evaluate him? Do you think this takes him down a peg at all? Or is Neal Brown in his mind saying that was just what I had to do today? It was just one of those days for him, like Texas Tech. If we played tomorrow, he could have had a 300-yard game like he's had earlier in the year. Does this not change at all if you're thinking in Neal Brown's head, which we can't do? Or does this maybe have Neal Brown say maybe the doubters were correct and there's a ceiling with Jarret Doege that now with a bowl win, we need to go to the next level and maybe he can't take us there?
I think the thing about Doege that's been particularly frustrating this year is like he's had good stretches, but we haven't seen like a step, right? Like I don't think there was one game or stretch of games where we looked at him and said, oh, he's markedly better than he was at the end of last year, or even that he was at the beginning of the season.
Sure.
He played fine most of the year. He was very clean in terms of turnovers until today. The touchdown production wasn't there. The deep passes weren't really there. And so if there's any message to Doege going into next year, it's probably that, you've got to take a step. You're going to be, he started 30 something college games. Like you've got to take a step at this point, or else, Garrett Green and Goose Crowder are looking much more intriguing just to see what they have. Because at some point, after 30 starts, you have everything out there. They know what you can do. And if it's not, if you have a hard ceiling and, West Virginia's kind of middling again next year, what would be the point in sticking with Doege then?
Right.
That's if I had to guess at a message that he's taking from this, it would be that the clock is kind of ticking on him just to, show he can be the guy or that he deserves to be the guy.
And I wouldn't anticipate any pouting or anything from Doege, because you got to remember that relationship with Doege and Neal Brown goes back to when he was 10 years old.
Yeah, it really does. I think literally 12 years old.
Yeah, you just talked about Neal Brown being loyal to his guys and kind of being a player's coach. If there's anybody on this roster that knows that about Neal Brown, it's Jarret Doege. So I wouldn't. Yeah. I'm not too worried about Jarret Doege's, psyche or where he's at mentally as far as his spot on the roster going into next year. But I think he's got to be a realist about it, though, and know that door is open. It's not written in stone that he's going to come back and be the guy again, because as Cody mentioned, you know what you're going to get at a Jarret Doege at this point. And if something comes along that is better than that, then you got to take a look at that.
Yeah, and I do feel like that there is a ceiling with Jarret Doege, that the word that I put it as the phrase, he's been good enough at times to win for this WVU team, certainly with how the defense has been playing. I think he actually was good enough to win more than they won. I think there were some games he played well enough to win. They did not win. Could have actually been good enough to maybe get an 8-win season out of this year. But certainly it was not good enough at other times, and I do believe there's a ceiling for him. So when there's a ceiling for you, certainly could leave questions and leave concerns, especially when you leave a bowl game after making those mistakes. Somebody comes in who you previously replaced, who's also a veteran, maybe not as experienced as you, though, in terms of overall games, and goes in there and actually ends up leading the team to a victory. And again, Jarret Doege, 15 for 25, 159, a touchdown and an interception. Also that fumble that's not on the stat line, that's certainly not good and was part of things. Austin Kendall, 8 for 17, 121, two touchdowns, no picks, no mistakes. So he didn't necessarily throw for tons of yards, but he has those key touchdowns, did have a couple big plays and did not make the mistakes. Also able to do it on the ground a little bit. That's better production in this game, but who knows? Again, certainly a lot to see here moving forward into the offseason.
Also, remember, Army just soaked up the clock in the second half.
Yeah, they did.
Kendall didn't have a whole bunch of yards, but he also, I can't believe that he had 17 opportunities to throw the ball, because it didn't seem like WVU ran 17 plays in the second half, let alone 17 passes. So
sure.
That I just wanted to get that in there. Is
no, I hear you. That's
it.
It's the spread. It's a fact. It's factually the case. 8 for 17. But I do. Your eyes kind of can deceive you, because it did not feel like that to me either. Again, Cody Nespor, Tom Bragg here, WV Sports Now. Mike Asti here with the West Virginia Mountaineers post-game show after winning the Liberty Bowl. So the Mountaineers do close out 2020 with a bowl victory here on Pittsburgh Sports Live. Cody, Tom and I talked about this a little bit, and before we get into next year and those predictions, I do want to ask you this. We talked about this throughout the season as well, but now it's finally over, because we've a lot of the time we're able to say, well, we can't say this until the season's over. So here it is. It's over. 6-4 team, a bowl victory, not the best of bowls, but certainly a quality bowl win. They still have these quarterback questions. The defense played well throughout the year, certainly after controversy of the offseason. Leddie Brown was able to emerge. The team took steps. They took that climb that they're talking about. There certainly were bad moments, though, Texas Tech and some other games. Cody, how would you evaluate this season for WVU fans? What should they take from this year? Because some could argue it should have been better, but overall, it certainly wasn't bad. It certainly could have been worse. It certainly ends on a positive note and a warm, fuzzy feeling. But now putting it overall body of work into perspective, how would you evaluate 2020 for the Mountaineers?
Yeah. I think it was a good year. I think it was a progress year. By no means was this, and I don't think anybody really thought this was a team that was ready to play and ready to compete with the Oklahomas and the Texases. Sure. But I think we did see the right things this year. The running game obviously was a big plus. The defense was much, much better than last year. And Neal Brown's second recruiting class was just as good, if not better, than his first. So I think we saw all the right things. And then, I mean, I don't know a West Virginia fan that would stick their nose up at a bowl victory.
Sure.
And honestly, 9-2 Army is a much better bowl win than 3-7 Tennessee.
100%.
Yeah, we talked about that before you got on. This was, they
100%.
When Tennessee backed out, it didn't get easier for West Virginia. Yeah. Their opponent improved exponentially.
Yeah.
Tennessee stunk.
Tennessee hadn't won a game since the end of October.
Tennessee was terrible.
If the Mountaineers would have played Tennessee, it would have been one of those games where if you don't win convincingly, it would have looked really, really bad. And if you lose, it would have been doomsday, especially after the way they ended the season.
That would have been a fun day on Twitter if they smashed them, though.
I mean, I guess I'll tell you this. The only benefit would have been is I feel like this show, the site, it might have benefited in terms of business because of the interest in, oh my God, what's going on with the program, especially the way they ended the year. So yes, there would have been that, but no, this was a quality team they played, who played well against Cincinnati and some other teams this year, had to put together a schedule and won 9 games, and the Mountaineers get a victory over that team and not having to come back to get the win. So yeah, this certainly was a better scenario, especially when Neal Brown was out there publicly saying, I want to play Army. So they weren't shying away. They didn't get forced into the game. They wanted Army, they played Army, and they beat Army. Positive.
And are there negative things about this season? Yes. But I mean, if you nitpick those and then ignore all the positives, you're just being pessimistic. This is a team that improved, that won more games, that looked much better, statistically was much better, won a bowl game against a good opponent. I mean, I know West Virginia fans don't always do this, but you can let yourselves be happy after this season.
Right. Yeah, the off season is an hour old. You can relax and enjoy the good things. There's lots of times to nitpick and get into the bad.
At least until like spring ball. Let's just it's the first bowl win in 4 tries. So,
I mean the end of Holgerson, they were losing bowl games. I mean
only the second bowl they've won since they joined the Big 12, and this was their 10th season, 9th year in the Big 12. But Cody, I think the moratorium on when you can start grumbling about football, you got to go with the first multiple game losing streak in Big 12 play for the basketball team. And said it like clockwork. They'll go on the road. If things have been like they have in recent year, we'll talk more about basketball in the future. But man, that team just never been able to win on the road in the Big 12 the last few years. So
and that's going to be
when they start losing on the road in the Big 12, you can start griping about football.
Right. And also, you're getting people out there have already seen this. They're comparing this team to 2010 and the Final Four team, and certainly the hype is up there. But we'll do some post game shows for some big games and some tournaments there.
On that.
Right, and certainly I'll have some shows here in PSL. You guys will have the coverage on the site, so that'll all be out there in the future. But yeah, once that happens, Mountaineer fans will get to be negative in that direction with the expectation that they are right now for the basketball team. And it's going to get into basketball season once they wrap up the celebration and we turn that clock right now for Mountaineer fans. But it's a bowl victory. Those have been few and far between. And Tom, second bowl win since joining the Big 12. That's a staggering stat out there because they've certainly been in more than two. So yeah, so that's a positive certainly for the Mountaineers. And going through this year with everything they dealt with not only COVID and having games scrapped, but also going into the offseason with the controversy in Vic Koenig, et cetera, having to change the staff, that certainly leads into part of this too. 6-4, a bowl victory, and against the quality opponent, unlike would have been Tennessee. All great things for Mountaineers going to the offseason. I also think we have to mention this. I think actually, and somebody said this to me on Twitter, the fact they did not play Oklahoma. Granted, I had a previous show that got scrapped, ended up having no reason to promote, but that was an hour after, Cody, as I see you laughing. I posted that, and it was like 20 minutes later, the game canceled when we were talking about that. But that game being scrapped certainly helps the perception for this program for fans moving forward into the offseason, because if you go in there and get blown out by Oklahoma, granted, everyone knew they weren't at that level, it might have left a worse taste in your mouth with the way the season ended and playing poorly, then to have the way the season ended, not have to deal with Oklahoma and then get a bowl victory against the quality opponent. It looks a lot better than if you mix in Oklahoma beating you by 20 points, which certainly could have happened the way they're playing and what they just did to Florida.
That's a good point. Yeah, getting stomped by Oklahoma and Iowa State in back-to-back weeks would have been a real sour note to end the year on.
Tom, I think you and I even talked about that in the last post-game show that would have been.
We talked about that after Iowa State.
That would have been doomsday in terms of fan perception and even for Neal Brown perception. They avoid it by not playing Oklahoma, and then they get the bowl win. So I don't think fans are even worried about Iowa State right now. They're thinking about the bowl victory and maybe overall season. But yeah, that does change things because Oklahoma, they would have won. It would have been a pretty convincing victory. I'd imagine.
That was like a month ago now, and it didn't happen. That's just one of those what if things that's I guess fun to talk about. But this team, they're not worried about. Well, good thing we didn't have to play.
I'm sure
Oklahoma
the players are not thinking
right
about
now.
it.
Yeah, they haven't thought about Oklahoma in a month. I bet.
And Darius still says he wanted to play Oklahoma. So the players probably wish they would have played the game. I'm sure they wish they would have played. I'm just saying in terms of perception, that potentially could have helped that game didn't exist and you didn't have to have what would have been that loss. Again, Cody Nespor, Tom Bragg here, Mike Asti, as we wrap up West Virginia's football season here for the Liberty Bowl.
The dog just joined us this time. By the way,
can we get I've had the dog on a few different shows. I don't think I know the name of the dog yet.
The dog's name is Lenny.
Okay, awesome.
Lenny is, and for the Simpsons fans, I have a black cat named Carl and a yellow dog named Lenny. So.
Awesome. So I'm going to do this right then. I'm going to reboot and do this right. Cody Nespor, Tom Bragg, I'm Mike Asti, joined by Lenny here on the West Virginia Mountaineers Bowl Victory postgame show here, Liberty Bowl champs here on Pittsburgh Sports Live. We appreciate Lenny joining us. And Lenny, a very, very good boy, as he's never interrupted any of these shows. He just sits there all peacefully. I appreciate that.
He has barked at Bob Huggins on conference calls a few times, but who hasn't, right?
I'm sure, and Bob probably enjoys it as well when that does occur. I do want to get this both from you guys here before we shut this chapter here, and we're already talking about basketball season, so that's already in the mind of fans, I'm sure. Thoughts and predictions. People make predictions for the new year. We're closing 2020, not only this season for the Mountaineers, but also this weird asinine year in general. Thoughts and predictions for the West Virginia football program into 2021. They may include bowl predictions or just predictions in general. We certainly have discussed the climb and climbing up the ladder, this being a year of progress for many reasons. But what are your thoughts for the state of this program moving forward into 2021 and then the 2021 season and reasonable expectations for that year, which Cody you mentioned earlier, taking another step is generally critical. So what will that look like for the Mountaineers for you guys?
I think it's got to be, several more wins on if you're playing a full schedule.
Right. Assuming that.
Assuming that. You want to see 7, 8, 9 wins even. I think realistically, the hope is that you can get to the Big 12 title game, and we'll see what happens there.
Okay.
It's hard not to be very impressed with what Oklahoma has coming back after you saw what they did
Yeah.
against Florida. I know it was an undermanned Florida team, but you look at that Oklahoma team and you go, well, that guy's coming back. Well, that guy's coming back.
Especially
well, that guy's
defensively.
coming back. Well, and Spencer Rattler, that's
Sure.
it's not like they haven't developed some good quarterbacks at Oklahoma over the years. And I know people were down on him this year, but he's a freshman, guys.
Yeah.
So, Oklahoma's going to be a tough hill to climb. I think Texas is going to be pretty good again next year. And we'll see with Iowa State. It'll be curious to see if they can take a step back, but those are the three teams at the top right now. That's what you're aiming for. If you want to win your league, you've got to be as good or better than those programs. So will West Virginia make that much of a leap next year? I don't think so, but that's the goal. I think that's what you're shooting for. And if you come up short, then you deal with it. But you really just want to make sure that progress is going forward. I think it's going to be tough to overcome all of that next year. But like I said, you want to see that progress. It was tough at times this year. It was start and stop. Sometimes we weren't all necessarily trusting the climb. I still am at this point.
I think I am right now too.
You get to see what 2020 was as a whole and everything you had to overcome and deal with and how just completely not normal this was. It's hard to take a whole lot of out of this other than Neal Brown and his staff and these players were able to find a way to persevere in the end. And I think that's very, very important. You talk about trusting the climb. There's going to be some missteps along the way. There's going to be some backwards progress along that climb. And then sticking with that theme, the important thing is that at the end of the day, you're going forward still. And I think at the end of the day for the 2020 season, West Virginia's going forward and going to be feeling good going into 2021.
It is a climb. It's literally a climb. So they're advertising that it's going to be a climb. It's not going to be just coasting. Yes.
They mean it when they say it, I think.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Cody, thoughts on next year? Because I do agree with Tom, but to be fair, that might be more realistically 2 years away. But
like I said, I think that's the high end.
It's the goal for sure. I'm sure that's what he's going to be telling his team. I'm sure that's how you reasonably build. And honestly, if a couple games would have went the other way and maybe they would have had better quarterback play from Doege in a couple of those games, that bad loss to Texas Tech again that I can't get out of my mind, maybe things would have been different and get you closer to that game, if not be in the Big 12 title game with how chaotic and crazy this year was. Maybe you don't have the benefit of Oklahoma dropping 2 early games with Spencer Ratliff another year under his belt, but who knows? They've been known to be upset before in the regular season. Cody, your thoughts, though, for next year for the Mountaineers?
Yeah, I agree with you guys that I can't really see them reasonably contending with, Oklahoma and Texas and Iowa State if Iowa State is just as good. But what I want to see is I want to see them start to separate from the middle of the Big 12. I don't want to see them mess around with Texas Tech and get beat bad. I don't want to see them, muddle around with TCU and Kansas State.
Oklahoma State should be rebuilding now.
Oklahoma State, and I've always thought it's interesting because so many of those coaches, I think it was 4 coaches all came in the same year with Neal Brown.
Right.
And then plus Aranda at Baylor this year. So half the league is new coaches. If you want to be, one of the better teams in the league, if Neal Brown wants to be one of the better teams, he has to separate from those other new coaches, right? He has to get West Virginia to that point faster than these other guys do, because that's all, they all have the same goal.
Well, even before those 4 guys came in, Matt Campbell hadn't been at Iowa State all that long.
Yeah, it's really just Mike Gundy.
Lincoln Riley hadn't been at Oklahoma all that long. No. Yeah, exactly. Tom Herman hadn't been at Texas all that long.
It's just Mike Gundy. He's been there forever.
Just Mike Gundy.
Gary Patterson.
And Gary Patterson. Yeah, Mike Gundy was a man, and he was 40 like 15 years ago.
Mike Gundy is legit over 50 years old right now.
But I just, I just don't want to see him, mess around with if we're going to trust the climb and they're going to be contending for a title, they can't mess around with TCU anymore. They can't go down to Texas. They can't get blown out by Texas Tech's tempo anymore. They've been good against Kansas State, weirdly.
Right. And that was
Neal Brown's still undefeated against purple teams.
Yeah, that's the big win for Neal Brown is number 16 Kansas State, and then of course the bowl game. So prior to today, the big win was against Kansas State. But
so if the step this year was winning close games, which they did, which they didn't do.
They were in every game.
Yeah, I think the goal next year is every game shouldn't be close. You should win. You should have some convincing win.
Yeah, you need to blow some people out.
Yeah. Not just Kansas.
And I think speaking to that, you hear a lot about they play down to their competition. You got to avoid that. You can't, like you said, if TCU stinks next year, you don't need to be in a dogfight in the fourth quarter in Fort Worth with an experienced veteran team. You need to go blow them out. And I agree. I think that's definitely a step that you would like to see out of this West Virginia team because it just hasn't been there really since that Will Grier team.
Yeah.
But 2018,
and I also think, because I know that we talked about that through us post-game shows, and Tom, you were the guy mostly telling me, well, that's not really fair to hold that as much against them this year. We got to get over it. This is a positive year, and I do definitely agree. But next year, that'll be more fair to hold against them. And as I said in a show that I did months ago during the middle of the season, at some point, the bad bad losses cannot outnumber the big wins. The big wins have to be there in greater numbers than the bad losses. The bad losses still there are about dead even with the big wins right now for Neal Brown as head coach of the Mountaineers, if not tipping the wrong way in 2 years. So, of course, you have to give him time with rebuilding. Of course, last year could be a mulligan. Many of our colleagues said last year was really classified as year zero around the Mountaineers. Now, if you want to do that, that's fine. You have a bowl win. This is certainly a big win. But, yeah, Cody hit the nail on the head. You cannot go next year, and even if you finish with 7 wins, have 1 or 2 of them just be god-awful bad losses to 3 or 4 win programs that you easily should have beat, because then it will be fair to say, well, okay, you're not in the Big 12 title game because those programs are further ahead than you. But if you would have beat Texas Tech or you would have beat TCU, you would have then be there. And I don't think that conversation can exist next year and again the year after that. And then the climb still be trusted by as many fans.
Yeah, no, if you're going to take one of those losses, or gosh, even rarely,
right, you're not going to go undefeated. You're going to lose.
Well, no, what I'm saying is, if you're going to take one of those losses, or even 2, you have to win every other game. That's what Oklahoma does,
and convincingly
every year they lose to somebody that they absolutely should not lose to. Sure. And everyone says, Oklahoma stinks. The Big 12 is done. They're not even going to get into the playoff. And then they beat Texas, and then they rattle off like 7 more wins. And then they blow somebody out in the Big 12 title game. 2020 was a little weird, so they didn't get in the playoff this year.
Well, they had 2 losses, but
but that was the thing. They had 2 of those losses this year. And I think I think we even said that day is that, that makes this completely different from every other Oklahoma team, because they only lose 1 game before they get blown out in the playoff. Instead, they lost 2, and they didn't.
They also got really, really good. That if they would be in the playoff, I'm not sure they wouldn't do better than some teams that are in the top 4. I mean, they have really improved themselves, especially defensively. They lost 2 games they couldn't get in, and I'm not saying the Mountaineers.
Also, they lost 2 games like 3 months ago. It's not like they were losing these games.
They're totally different teams,
right?
Right, totally different team. Sure.
I like the Matt Rule blueprint at Baylor as kind of like a good way to judge teams, because his first year was 1-11, like irredeemable, and then the second year I think they had 9 wins, but it was these kind of grinded out, every game's a dogfight. You win by single digits, you lose by single digits, and then of course there was last year.
I think they beat multiple teams named after guys who fought at the Alamo that year.
Right, but then last year you really saw the jump that I'm kind of talking about that West Virginia needs to make, is they started blowing out everybody in the Big 12 not named Oklahoma.
Right, you can take those losses.
Right. And then
that Baylor team had Oklahoma beat too. They blew it.
Was that? Did that go into overtime, or was that when they had the big fourth quarter?
I was on the road and trying to get to sleep for an early flight as that was happening. I believe we were at Kansas State. That was the same day of the Jarret Doege Kansas State game last year.
Well, that's why and I remember this from talking with Baylor's reporter, that was why some thought there was expectations around Baylor coming into this year because of what happened last year. So that does kind of detail it perfectly. Granted, 1 win to 9, obviously that's Neal Brown didn't have to do that much work, but certainly was kind of bare a year ago.
If you look at the non-conference games West Virginia had, we could have been talking about an 8 or 9 win season.
Oh, I think that's fair to say. This team could, as much as 6-4 with a quality bowl win against a good team is great. This year, that's why I said it could have been better, but it also could have been worse. It could have been better. They could have won one or two more games, and I don't think anyone.
Eddie Brown would have ran for 250 yards on Florida State.
That's it.
Right, sure. Yeah, and that would have been another victory without COVID. But even the schedule that they had, obviously Texas Tech and some of those other games, they could have had a 7-win, 8-win season with this schedule, with this team. They certainly would have had more wins if it was not for COVID, and you would have been able to play Florida State. So that has to be factored in here in terms of the perception of this year and the challenges of this year. And they certainly had to deal with COVID and opponents dealing with COVID and not knowing when games would happen, and then having a game get scrapped against Oklahoma, like every other team. But the Mountaineers certainly dealt with it, and then had controversy of the offseason. It was not an easy year to coach a team like this while you're trying to build and trying to climb. And at the end of the day, he had a great day in the bowl game. They won a bowl game in a quality bowl game against a quality opponent. So again, you end on a positive note. There could have been more. It could have been better, but it certainly could have been worse as well. Figuring out the quarterback situation will be a major question mark and conversation all offseason, I'm sure. Recruiting certainly went well again. Mountaineers certainly doing really well. I know, Tom, you know this. They're doing really well in West Virginia, which is nice. Certainly you can find that coverage over there at WV Sports Now.
Be nice if they went out and got one of the in-state high school kickers that have been so good, because, woof, they need a kicker real bad right now.
Yep.
Yeah, well, you did tell us the whole life trajectory of Casey Legg, but yes, in terms of the future of the program, they do need a more of a thoroughbred kicker, which has been a staple of quality Mountaineers teams of the past, and certainly not the case right now. That could help take you to another level. You don't want to be missing any field goals in these close games, but you need quality wins to outnumber the bad losses. You need to take care of business when you're supposed to take care of business. And I don't think any of us would be mad if you go next year and you lose to Oklahoma, even if they would blow you out, and then you lose even to an Iowa State or one other team, but you take convincing victories down the road against these other teams that are right now lower level programs than you. If you do that, no one will be mad. No one's predicting undefeated seasons, but some bad losses exist right now that need to be cleaned up for sure. Any final words here from either one of you guys? Again, we touched on our thoughts for the future of the program and kind of this year overall and the perception of this year. We know that quarterback conversation is going to exist because of the way this win went down. Obviously, you're seeing a loss of several quality players, including Darius Stills, to the NFL. So that's going to be a major hit to this team. But outside of the quarterback situation, outside of perception, any final thoughts about, who is going to be back for this team moving forward and just this program in general, or just final thoughts you maybe have about your coverage coming up here at WV Sports Now, if you'd rather?
I'm going to bang the drum for the secondary a little bit, just because I think that might be, with Darius gone, I don't think the defensive line will be the kind of hallmark of the team anymore. But when you look at the secondary, I think they're all back because Alonzo Adai's coming back.
Kind of been underrated too.
Yeah, and they've been great. They haven't made the splash plays, right. But if you look, both outside corners were brand new, both safeties were brand new. Tyke Smith is already a 2-time All-American. I really like the secondary going into next year and going into the future, and so I'm gonna bang the drum on them a little bit, as to be excited about for next year.
Kerry Martin is
coming back.
Allegedly coming back. He has said all along that after taking this season off, that he would be back with the program. Even I still follow him on social media as recently as the last few weeks. He's been saying that I haven't left the program. I'm going to be back. So, and that's a guy that started as a freshman. So that's just another body, I think, to add to what Cody was saying. Cody, real quick, something you mentioned that secondary, something that was in the post game that I didn't think really got picked up. Tyke Smith was in some sort of accident prior to the game, and there were several head injuries to players during the game, which forced some guys you didn't expect. Dante Bonamico finished with 10 tackles today, and I don't think he's had 10 tackles all year. So
I feel like that wasn't covered. I don't feel much of that at all.
Yeah, no, it wasn't. And I don't know that it really was out there until Neal Brown said it in the post game. Somebody asked about some of these guys that were getting the chance to play and what was going on with Tyke. And he said, well, he was in a little bit of an accident and we wasn't ready to go today. So he didn't seem
shocking. You can cover that up though in our social media.
Right. Well, and I think that leads me to believe that it wasn't that serious. I mean, he might have banged his knee on the steering column in a fender bender or something, but we don't know. That's just what I was thinking. But I just wanted to get that out there as you mentioned it. And I've got it in my notes here, underlined Tyke Smith in an accident with question marks. So something to keep an eye on.
Yeah. Neal said he was in an accident and he didn't practice a lot, which says to me that he still did practice at least a little bit.
Yeah. So it wasn't a serious accident. He just maybe banged up or
that's what I would assume, but I don't know.
You don't believe it to be disciplinary, I guess, is a question.
No, that's not. I mean, unless Neal Brown lied to us, which he never, not to my knowledge that he has.
Right. Yeah. It's not like when I'm doing the Pitt postgame show with somebody lying to us. Those are kind of hard to map out in terms of what we hear.
New comments.
Alan just deals with, we're making things up almost on the fly, but go ahead, Cody.
No, that was it. Because X-Ray Low was out too, so I'm wondering if they were in something together, or because they won't tell us if it was COVID or not. But
right, sure.
It doesn't seem serious. And yeah, good exit for a lot of those seniors on the defense. Dylan Tonkery, who hasn't played a ton this year, I think had 11 tackles. Dante Bonamico, who Neal said hasn't played safety in 2 years, a former walk-on, had 10 tackles.
Those guys, high school teammates too, Tonkery and Bonamico. So it's
great.
I thought it was a really good story to see them go out like they did today.
Yeah, great for them. I mean, when the opportunity arises, great for them.
Okay. Yeah. And again, the Mountaineers, they get a bowl victory. Many programs cannot say that this year. A quality above 500 season for the Mountaineers. Again, many programs cannot say that this year. Tons of challenges existed from this year that didn't exist in past seasons. And again, this is still only year 2 for Neal Brown. It was a program that needed to be rebuilt when he got there. So there is a climb that they are still in the process of right now, and they were very literal with those promotions that the program was putting out there of trust the climb. There is a climb. It's not coasting neutral. There is a program that needs rebuilt, and right now it looks like the program took a step in the right direction this year overall with a bowl victory against a quality opponent. Happy Army got in a bowl game. I think it would have been a travesty if they didn't get to play in a bowl game when they clearly wanted to. I understand contractually and those issues, but I'm happy they got in a bowl game. They did not win it, unfortunately for them. They didn't get that 10th win, but still one hell of a season for Army with everything they deal with. I mean, you want to talk about challenges. Army deals with more challenges than everybody else every year, and football isn't their number one priority of their lives, of course. And yet 9-3, a really quality year for Army. Quality game. It was one of the better bowl games we've seen so far, and I watched some other ones that get forgotten. This was a quality game, even if you're not a fan of either program. But nonetheless, again, the Mountaineers get the victory. They finish out the year 6-4, 24-21 win over Army in the Liberty Bowl. So they do end 2020 with a champion of sorts and a trophy in their trophy case, and that is the Liberty Bowl title. Neal Brown gets that first bowl victory as the Mountaineers head coach and his first bowl win with a major top 5, Power 5 program. That's certainly big for him individually. Tons to talk about in the offseason about the quarterback controversy, quarterback discussion that's going to exist, how you can replace Darius Stills, the future of this program, and the steps they need to take that we articulated here for next year to take another step up that climb. But all of that can be a conversation for another day. We also will turn our attention, of course, to the basketball program that's in the midst of a great season, a top 10 season right now with Bob Huggins' crew that's already getting compared to that Final Four team. We will see where they finish and if they achieve those expectations as the basketball season continues through 2021. So for Cody Nespor, for Tom Bragg over there at WV Sports Now, of course, for Tom's dog Lenny, who also is a staff member with us at WV Sports Now and amongst the Pittsburgh Sports Now family. We appreciate all subscribers out there that joined us throughout the season, anyone who watched any of these post-game shows throughout the year. And of course, make sure to follow the website at WV Sports Now on Twitter. Follow the channel at PGH Sports Live on Twitter as well, and also West Virginia Sports Now over there on Facebook and WVSportsNow.com for the site where all of this post-game coverage, including this show and everything else, all the Zooms can live. And then we again pivot to recruiting and basketball season. The Mountaineers are your 2020 Liberty Bowl champions. And as I said, it was a challenging year. It could have been better. It could have been much worse, but the Mountaineers end 2020 being able to celebrate. So that's certainly a positive for the program as we speak.